It's sort of the first thing people think when they hear that you're a trans kid is like, oh, you won't go on puberty blockers, or, you know, like hormones are gonna change you. Or it's sort of, you kind of have to like be this debate around whether kids should go on hormones, which always comes from people who don't understand the sort of desperation you feel. I feel anyway as a trans kid, you know, knowing you want to be changed, you need to be changed, but not being able to. I feel like I exist somewhere outside of my body, like, all the time. It just feels like you can never be comfortable in what you are because you're not right. And I don't really know how I know that. I just do. And it feels like it could have been really easy. It could have been way easier than it is. And I wouldn't have had to be in a body that I don't want to be in. People use the word mutilation a lot for trans surgeries, but it feels to me more like the puberty I was supposed to go through was a kind of mutilation. Like, I didn't ask for this, but it just happened.
This video is brought to you by us. If you like what you see, please consider supporting us by becoming a member of our website. Visit transmatters.co for more information. So I think with you first, Susie, what I'd like to do is a little bit of myth busting, if you mind.
Okay, no problem.
I suppose what I want you to understand are these questions coming from someone who knows the answers.
Okay.
But I would like to get them on camera, if that's
right,
okay.
okay, that's fine.
Okay. So start with, are puberty blockers safe?
Yes, puberty blockers are safe, reversible, and have been proven to be so.
Amazing. Which covers the next question also. You've seen my questions. That's a joke. I want to, on film, so to speak, get a sort of medical definition of what puberty blockers do and don't do. And I was wondering if you could provide that one for me.
Puberty blockers pause puberty. It's like literally hitting a pause button. It effectively shuts down production of testosterone and estrogen. Everybody has both, and it shuts both down. So it basically takes somebody back into a prepubertal stage. That's all it does. And when that medication is removed, within 3 to 6 months, puberty will resume. That's it. That's all they do. They have been used for decades. The first time they were used on a transgender young person was in 1988 at the Amsterdam clinic by Louis Garon. You know, this is not experimental. And also, from that argument, does that mean we would never, ever introduce a new medication for fear that it was experimental and new? I mean, that's a nonsense argument in and of itself anyway.
Trans youth who receive gender-affirming care are also subjected to mutilating surgeries by their doctors. True or false?
That's ridiculous. Oh my God, really? No, that is not true. No.
Do you feel that young people are now identifying as trans because it's trendy?
I have never, ever met a single young person, and I have met thousands who have done it because they thought it was trendy. Ever.
Do you feel liberal parents are forcing their kids to transition?
I have never, ever come across a family where the narrative has come from the parent forcing the child into a pathway. Not ever. What I do see is families where they're desperately trying to keep their kids alive, where they're desperately trying to keep their kids safe. I have also seen young people who've been rejected by their family, who've been rejected by their parents, and those who are meant to love them unconditionally but clearly don't. And I've seen the damage that causes, and I've seen the heartache, and I've seen, honestly, the huge impact that has on a young person's life, where the person that they should be able to rely on to be their biggest cheerleader, turning their back on them because of something that they cannot change, that is just part of who they are. It kind of makes me reflect on my experience as the mum of a trans young person who started puberty and needed access to this medication, and the lengths that I would go to, that I did go to get it for her, because I recognised if she didn't, then I didn't know what the cost would be.
I want to start by getting an overview of what the ban is, who it's affecting, and where we can go from there, really. So when I say to you, the puberty blocker ban, could you explain that for me? What's going on in this country at the moment?
So I think to understand that, you have to first go back to the Cass review. So Dr. Hilary Cass, she was a paediatrician who was appointed by Kemi Badenoch, the previous government's minister, to do a review into youth gender services within the NHS. Her review, she did speak to some trans people, but she also came from a perspective that we felt was quite medicalising, by which I mean she sort of saw being trans as something that was inherently distressing, that was a kind of medical condition that could be kind of treated. And as part of her report, she argued that puberty blockers should not be routinely prescribed on the NHS. She felt that there wasn't sufficient evidence for that. This was really difficult because clearly a lot of people, had gone to the NHS with the specific intention of accessing healthcare that they felt would make their lives better, and now they were no longer routinely going to be able to do that.
The Cass review itself is a political document. One person leading an investigation into gender healthcare who'd never ever worked in gender healthcare. I don't know any other aspect of medication or medicine or wherever where somebody who led on that investigation, on that review, was somebody who had never actually treated a single person with gender dysphoria, never actually worked with a single young person who was questioning their gender or were adamant that this is who they are. Just that single point in terms of its credibility means that it's totally and utterly off the table in terms of any credibility for me, for anybody else. And then you only need to look at how it's been condemned internationally. WPATH have spoken out about it, EPATH, OzPath. There has been widespread condemnation from the entire trans community about that piece of work, and more evidence is coming to light, including the most recent study, the 400-page review that was done by Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, where they come to very different conclusions than the Cass review, but they dealt with clinicians who actually work in this field, not people who actively work against trans people.
I mean, literally days before the Conservative government went into general election mode and that particular parliament was closed down, she issued this ban and she said, actually, I think that all puberty blockers in the UK via private prescription should be banned. And that obviously meant that that was like the final option was cut off for a lot of trans young people who had been using private providers to get that care.
There's been a big pushback in the NHS against gender-affirming care. That pushback, I think, is quite politically motivated. It's not generated by a kind of genuine desire to see positive outcomes for young trans people. Mm-hmm. It comes from a slightly different place. It comes from a place of believing that transness is a pathology, an illness that is to be cured. Maybe this person is going to have to live their life as trans. Maybe we can't stop it. but we should absolutely, in the way in which we treat young people, seek to dissuade them from transitioning from their sex assigned at birth. So that's where it comes from. And of course, most trans people don't agree. Most trans people know that they will be much happier. They'll live their real lives if they're allowed to transition. And for some trans people, not all trans people, being able to pass in your real gender is very, very important. And when you're a teenager, before you're able to take cross-sex hormones, puberty blockers are the way to preserve the optionality of being able to pass in later life. Although the NHS's provision of healthcare to trans people before the puberty blockers ban was really, really poor, there was at least a theoretical possibility of obtaining puberty blockers. Largely theoretical, to be fair, because it's a bit like having a 10-month waiting list for an abortion. The fact of being able to get puberty blockers on the NHS gave them a reason to believe their son or their daughter that it was a good thing for them to have puberty blockers, and then if they couldn't get them on the NHS, then they would look for private routes. So I think in a sense, really, the sort of signalling effect of banning puberty blockers is probably more consequential than the actual practical effect of banning puberty blockers.
So fast forward, we get a new Labour government. They campaign on a message of change. So probably like you, I thought maybe we'd get some change.
I was hoping.
So the ban initially that the Conservative government introduced was temporary, and then it was made permanent by Wes Streeting, the current Health Secretary. He commissioned a report by an organisation called the Committee on Human Medicines, and they recommended that puberty blockers should be banned because of the lack of safety and efficacy data, in their view. Now, that's clearly one particular opinion, and there are many internationally and within the UK. But I suppose that meant that people were saying that, well, the options now, like a lot of people had been getting prescribed by private providers who would maybe be based in Europe, and then they would be able to send and pick up drugs to do puberty blocking in the UK. That's now no longer possible. It would be illegal to do that. It's in fact criminal, which means that we're kind of in this situation where private prescribers are totally shut down. So if you're a transgender person in that situation, you have no options. You've got nowhere to go.
When the ban was first put into place,
Yeah.
what was the thought going through your head? What was the feeling?
If I'm being honest, rather confused. Because from every perspective I can think of, the ban just doesn't make sense. It's not that the medication is unsafe. Other countries allow it. It's not that the UK just doesn't like them, because in cis children, for using puberty blockers for any other purpose, perfectly allowed. And it's not really like it's a case of them being abused en masse by people who, quote unquote, don't need them, which is a silly idea anyway. Because I think at its peak, there's only, 40 or 50 children in the UK who are actually making use of them. I felt like it was just a way to attack a very marginalized group of people, and honestly, I felt confused.
I'm going to give you a professional courtesy out here by using the words, in your opinion.
Yes.
In your opinion, what would you say the cause for this ban was then? If it isn't to do all of the things the TERFs claim it is and save the children?
I'm honestly not sure. Part of me wants to say that it is just cultural bullshit imported from America. I feels like it's just an opportunity to politicize something which impacts in reality very few people, but is a pretty easy way of a government saying, hey, look, we just won a general election and we're already doing things. Look at how great we are.
When the ban was first put into place, it made me lose complete faith in Labour. Not like I had a lot of faith in them, but like trans rights is a massive dividing issue that I would have thought Labour would be supportive of, but they're very obviously not. When the puberty blocker ban was renewed, it was especially crushing because one of my friends had recently died who was trans. That felt like no one was looking out for us, no one cared about us. To me, in my life, this massive thing had happened and no one cared. The government didn't care. And it made it very real to me that we are literally dying and no one gives a shit. People say that Wes Streeting is ignorant, but to me, this is very clearly malevolent. It's really horrible what he's saying.
Especially when it was made permanent. I know that was after Wes Streeting met with trans children. And I can't imagine having trans kids that I'm pretty sure they were younger, like none of them were over 15, begging at your feet and then being like, I'll do it anyway.
It just sort of shows that they don't really care about us at all. Knowing that so many people don't care if trans kids die, that's pretty scary.
Everyone cares about our bodies, but only in a way that they can control. Like, they don't care if we're comfortable in them because we don't know ourselves. In quotes. Yeah, I guess it feels a bit like a betrayal.
I want to believe that we'll put enough pressure on Streeting and make him overturn the ban, but in reality, I don't think that Labour cares about us. I don't think that people in government really care about trans kids, and I think we're sort of a minority that can be sacrificed to them.
I wanted to start with sort of why I wanted to interview you specifically. You know, we've been working on this project in one way, shape or form for 4 months or so now. Mm-hmm. And a problem I've run into in terms of proving the efficacy of puberty blockers is data.
Yeah.
The studies aren't being done, aren't published well enough. We're just not evolved in that conversation enough yet. And I think by interviewing people like yourself, people who are successful trans adults who have gone through that process, we can hopefully see a little bit of that.
Yeah.
I suppose to start with, what difference did puberty blockers make on your transition, you think?
I mean, it's difficult to equate it to other people's experiences because it's the only thing I've ever known. There's that really cliched line of, you know, puberty blockers saved my life. But for me, the addition of puberty blockers just gave me the opportunity to transition and press pause at the same time. It allowed me to fully start my social transition whilst pressing pause on the kind of innate incoming pressures of my imminent puberty. Yeah.
Puberty blockers are mentioned. Mm-hmm. How long is it for that process before you know about the situation and you're taking them? How long is that gap, you think?
From being first seen at the Davghter Portman Clinic to having the referral for being prescribed my puberty blockers was around about 18 to 20 months. I didn't receive them because of ethical dilemmas with my general practitioner. So I didn't actually get my first injection until just after my 16th birthday, I think. Yeah.
What was that year and a half like for you?
Agony. Oh my God, waiting. You know, I had already kind of gone through finding the linguistics to kind of represent my internal thoughts and feelings. I had gone through family therapy. I had gone through threatened to be sectioned, threatened to be put up for adoption. I had been through physical, verbal, mental abuse. You know, I was poked and prodded and observed more than I've ever been in my life because they were so cautious. And I think that's always one of my kind of biggest hang-ups about puberty blockers, is that people think, you know, my mum always phrases it brilliantly. She's like, they're not sweets. From the start of my transition, when I started having those initial conversations at 11, through to my referral to a young person GIC, through to the endocrinology team, you're looking at almost 5 years. Yeah.
Well, I think what's interesting there is I want to kind of contrast that with where we are now in terms of the public perception of puberty blockers, because I think it's such a stark contrast between hearing you say those things and the response you see in the public and the media. That must be quite difficult to hear, given your experience.
I think the thing that bothers me so much is people do not understand the experience that they're robbing young trans people of. People do not understand the fact that this medication does not cause permanent changes, it just presses pause. And people don't understand that it's an exceptionally difficult drug to access. It's an exceptionally difficult drug to find a pathway to. And when you're on it, it is monitored so heavily, sometimes to the detriment of the mental health of people who are on it, because they're being monitored so frequently. But it has to be like that. It has to go through those hoops. And I wish people understood that they could not be accessed like they're an over-the-counter drug.
We've seen this huge backlash to the proposal to reform the Gender Recognition Act to bring it in line with human rights standards, which means having a system that is an administrative system and not based on a diagnosis. And even though this is the human rights standard that the system should meet, there's been a huge backlash that has only grown. Attitudes towards trans people have worsened in the past few years, since 2018. And hate crime has increased, and it's part of a broader stripping of rights in this country. Is part of a broader scapegoating minorities. It's restricting our rights to protest. Is degradation of our economic and social rights. I think the backlash is being so strong that I think is very inconvenient for any politicians to actually make the reforms to the Gender Recognition Act, or to provide and make sure that children have access to healthcare. We see this for trans rights and trans healthcare, but also other types of healthcare that are cast as a moral issue, like abortion, for example. So then it's not about the right to healthcare; it's about debate. It's about who is right and who is wrong. And in this case, I think trans people have not been listened to and are not participating in the processes that they should lead.
We are opposed to the ban, and there's a few reasons for that. I think one is that, as I said, we don't think criminalising is the right approach. We do have concerns about some private prescribers, and ideally we believe in the NHS. We believe that puberty blockers should be free at the point of use. They should be part of a package of holistic supportive care, and we think it should be timely. We shouldn't think that people shouldn't have to wait more than 6 years, which is the current waiting time, to access that. But at the same time, as I said, I don't think we think this ban is going to make anyone safer. For some families, it's going to mean them paying a lot of money to go abroad to access care. We don't think that's right. And obviously for other families, it means that young people will have to stop taking puberty blockers, or if they had intended to take puberty blockers, they're going to be, in some cases, kind of forcibly detransitioned, and we think that's really dangerous. Puberty blockers are regularly used, particularly for precocious puberty, which is when young people go through puberty at an earlier time than many of their peers. Now, I think we have to ask questions about that because, from what I understand, the main issues with precocious puberty is that social element, which it can be understandably very uncomfortable to be going through a puberty process when the rest of your classmates are not. But when you look at it for trans young people, the indication is the same. It's that trans young people don't want to go through a puberty that they haven't chosen, because of the social impact it's going to have on them, because it's going to make them feel, both in themselves, they're not going to feel comfortable in their body, but also because, it's not going to allow them to fit in with their classmates in the way they want to. So the fact that the ban specifically targets trans young people, we think is discriminatory in the way it operates.
I think one of the fundamental things that I keep coming back to is that every single person deserves to be able to access healthcare when they need it, as they need it, and they shouldn't have to pay for it. I mean, that's a fundamental right of each and every human being. And that applies to trans people in just the same way. It applies to everybody, regardless of what your characteristics are. The job that I'm doing now, that I started last year, providing healthcare services for trans people of all ages, we shouldn't have to exist. The NHS should be doing this. The NHS should be providing free healthcare, affirmative healthcare that makes trans people feel seen and heard and gives them what they need when they need it without unnecessary barriers. The NHS should be doing it. We shouldn't have to exist.
At the heart of it, right, this issue is saying, we as a government do not think that you should be able to transition. We think that you have to go through what they would describe as a normal puberty. The thing is, there isn't a normal puberty because in society, gender roles are extremely restrictive. I mean, I don't need to tell anyone here that, but they force you into a binary, and then the way you're treated, the opportunities you're given, your whole life in many ways is defined by that route. So it's not neutral. And that's really concerning and should have concerns for everybody because, what's next? In America, they've already gone after abortion and reproductive care. We're seeing similar campaign groups popping up in the UK. So this is also about a much wider fight to restrict autonomy, to make people less able to express themselves, and to reassert quite traditional gender norms onto society. So I think if I'm an ally, I think I'm first asking myself, well, I better do something because they'll come for me next.
So bodily autonomy is really about a person's control over their own life and body. So it's about, the medical treatment that we want to access. It's about whether we want to have a family, how big this family is, how do we want to, space children if we want children. Because human rights are interlinked. If bodily autonomy is restricted, then those rights are not going to be realized. People are going to suffer from discrimination and lack of ability to really decide what your life is going to look like.
As a trans kid, you don't have any autonomy. It's sort of constantly taken away from you by the media, by doctors, by the Minister, Secretary for Health. It's very hard not having control of your own body, knowing that you could with puberty blockers, with hormones, but not being allowed it because you're young or because they don't like people like you or whatever the reason is. It sort of feels like you're not in control of yourself, your own body, your own experience. People don't understand it, and so they won't help you.
What does that feel like, not being in control?
Well,
it's hard to describe a
yeah.
feeling.
I guess it's like you're not treated as a person, and then that means you're not seen as a person. They don't legislate as if you're real. You're just like a number. And then even when you speak to them, I think they find it very easy to put you in a box, and that nobody ever seems to reckon with what it's actually like.
For me, the fundamental question here is, whose right is it to choose how somebody lives their life? Why does a newspaper columnist in the Sunday Times know better than a young person or their loving parents or a prescribing doctor? What's their basis for interfering in the life of that person? I don't really get it. To me, the question which is really at stake here is who gets to choose what life you lead, and that must always be you. It can't be anyone else. No one else has a stake in your life. Certainly they don't have the stake in your life that you do.
Amnesty International is concerned about what's happening to bodily autonomy of women and trans people, especially around the world. We see draconian restrictions that are affecting people's life, like the right to life is at risk, and it's not just the US or here, it's around the world. These trends are really, global. And they're also, really connected to people who want to be in power. So they are, exploited to win elections, essentially. But, we keep campaigning. We hope to be effective. I think that, we need to stick with hope. There's no other choice than keep hoping and keep working. I think at the moment it looks a bit bleak.
You grew up in Cornwall.
Yes, I did.
What was it like to transition at 13 in Cornwall?
It went about as well as you can imagine. It was challenging. I faced, abuse from students and teachers, and I also had lots of fun external input from people who thought that I had made the wrong decision. And still, to this day, if ever I go back there, I get things shouted at me in the street. The last time I went back for Christmas, when I was 26, I had a rock thrown at me while I was at a pub. So it kind of stays with you for your whole life.
How have the people around you reacted to your journey? Has it been positive? Has it been negative?
Mostly positive. My parents, hugged me and said they loved me no matter what. But in recent years, as I've started kind of physically transitioning, that's been a lot harder. In those years where I was just kind of, using a different name, and so it didn't feel like it was much of a change, my mum kind of took that time to educate herself and get used to the possibility, but my dad never did, and so that's still quite a sore point. I think my wider family, though, has been a lot more difficult. I have a grandpa who he voted for Trump, so obviously not exactly great there. My grandma, I didn't actually come out to her. She found my Instagram, where I had, used my name and my pronouns, and she went, "Oh!" And she used some quite old-fashioned language and said that something along the lines of, no matter what your sexual permutations, you will always be my granddaughter. But I'm really lucky in that I haven't had kind of any outright transphobic reactions.
In my household, it's mostly me and my mum, and she is what I would say is a tough. She lets me live in the house, but over the past 5 years I've been out to her, she hasn't changed how she refers to me. I'm still a girl in her mind, even though I repeatedly have asked her not to call me that. She's definitely a J.K. Rowling backer, and is very much in the view that transphobia is feminist, even though I tell her all the time that I'm feminist as well, and I don't have those kind of beliefs.
I've spoken to young people who are as young as 12 years old, and the amount of stress that they're talking to me about is not something I would expect from someone that young. And that's very sad to see, but it's just because the adults in their life making their life harder. Peer-to-peer interaction, so bullying between kids does happen, but most of the conversations, especially after big news stories, but I think in general, most of the conversations tend to be how adults in their life are treating it. Whether it be parents, whether it be school, quite a lot of it is school not accepting either name changes or gender changes. Despite no statutory guidance coming out, a lot of non-statutory guidance was put out with the Tory government. A lot of that, I think, although it's not necessary for teachers to follow, there are a large group of teachers that took that to heart, and it has just only made the lives of trans kids harder, essentially.
Was there a change in tone and responses that you had received after the ban was made permanent?
Depends on the day. I don't want to say it filters out, because it's not like these people don't get anxious, or like, you know, this big piece of, you know, news breaks, and they're anxious for a little bit, and then they're not anxious again, because they're still going to be anxious, and you'll still get those questions that you wouldn't have gotten before the ban. There's some evenings where I can talk to no one, either that being we only have one or two people on, and someone else has taken their chat, and then there's some where I'm constantly talking to someone, different people throughout the whole evening. It really just depends on the day. And it can be the smallest thing that people worry about, or sadly, huge events, especially to trans youth and the world they kind of live in.
I was wondering how you've seen the ban affect the people around you.
It's had a massive effect. I'm like constantly on edge because I'm really afraid that my friends are gonna die. Basically, what a day looks like to me is texting everyone that I know, meeting up with everyone, making sure everyone's alive. It's really, really vulnerable for us at the moment.
I was heading to a party with two of my friends from TKDB, and I was just crying on the train. We were walking by the canal. Two of my friends walked ahead of me, and I just stopped and I looked at the canal, and it took so much effort to step away from the edge, because all I could think about was how much more of this is going to happen, how much more of this can we take, how much more can we sit and watch as this just takes more and more of us. And it was that thought that got me away of, I'm not going to let it take me as well. I'm not going to let him take me as well, him being Wes.
If I had a solid support system and a healthcare system, then I wouldn't have to be looking after my friends, and I wouldn't have to be really worried for them all the time.
We've been looking at some data recently, and about 55% of 17 to 19-year-olds who have approached their GP for gender care are experiencing like quite severe mental health problems. This compares to only about 1 in 5 who are not trans, which is obviously a really high number, and I think there's a wider mental health crisis across all young people. But clearly, trans young people are at the very forefront of that kind of general attack on young people, which, you know, informs their mental health.
The support we need is obviously healthcare. Like having actual counsellors that are available that aren't terrible and aren't trying to persuade you to not be trans. That's the experience I've heard from everyone on like cams or anything like that. No one wants to hear trans kids. They want to turn them into cis kids. It would be a really important thing for trans kids to be heard.
After all of that happened, the same night we did an emergency occupation outside of Wes Streeting's constituency office. One of our youngest members at this point was 13. And so it was for him, really, for people his age, that I was afraid, and we were just laying on sort of inflatable air mattress or sleeping bags in front of this office on the street, and there were people walking past us, and they were drunk and they were calling us things I didn't want him to hear. So I just lay like across him, on top of him. I put one hand over one of his ears and I was singing lullabies. Hinduism is very queer and very trans, and I have a lot of stories about that. And I was just reciting those and just kept chanting, we're beautiful, we're beautiful, we're divine, as if that's trying to convince him, but also trying to convince myself, and just trying to block out everything that was going on around us, because I couldn't let it take him.
I know so many people who almost didn't make it to adulthood, and because of dysphoria, because of transphobic families. And I know that if they'd had access to puberty blockers, life would have been so much better for them. And the fact that this is now not just harder, but impossible is absolutely terrifying, because it means there are so many more trans kids who are not going to become adults. It's mostly in that atmosphere, that knowledge that our government is becoming more and more overtly transphobic and our country is becoming less and less safe for people like us.
It's made me not see transition as something possible for me in the next few years. Like, my plan was always, when I move out, then I'm gonna pursue that. But now it's very turbulent to me. I don't know what's gonna be taken away. I don't know what's gonna happen. The future is uncertain.
I want, more so than I've seen elsewhere, for your voices to be put front and center. And putting myself in the perspective of a cis audience member watching this film, I was wondering, what would you want a member of the general public to take away from watching a film like this?
Trans kids are just kids, you know? They should be allowed to just live their lives with equal access to healthcare that cis kids are allowed, because the puberty blocker ban is specifically only for transgender kids and for gender questioning kids. This is healthcare that is being denied to us because of our identities. And I think it's really important to not let the politics distract from the fact that a man with too much power has decided that some kids should be allowed more of a chance at life than other kids. We are just kids. We just want autonomy, we want respect, we want dignity, but most of all, we want to live. There really isn't anything else to it.
I know that the people around me are hurting, and it's completely legitimate. It's not fake, it's not a trend, it's just people in pain, and it really hurts that the government's letting us feel bad and is also saying, no, you don't feel bad at the same time. Like, it's just crushing us.
Trans youth still are youth, they're still kids, we're still scared of things, we still want support, we want guidance, we're learning things by ourselves, and being trans adds another layer of things to learn, and they don't need to make it this difficult. It doesn't need to be like this.
I think to the trans young people watching this, historically, it's been through organising, it's been through grassroots movement building that we have created change. I'm from a small place called Haringey, which was actually where a lot of the Section 28 pushback, which was resulting from trying to teach about LGBTQ relationships in schools, started. But, you know, it's through those movements that we survived, and in fact, we started to thrive. Communities grew, we have our own spaces, we have our own infrastructure. And yes, times are dark right now, and the government has very much got trans young people, you know, in their sights. But that will change when the media move on, when the far right move on. You know, we'll be in a position to be even stronger to fight back and start winning campaigns for things that affect us, for bodily autonomy and for trans justice.
Light shines brightest in the dark, or that kind of idea that queer resistance, queer rebellion, it's never more needed than it is at times of crisis like it is now. And it means that I get to see our community come together in ways that I never dreamed. I never thought we'd have to, but it's incredible to see what we can accomplish, like at the Department of Education or the NHS England, all of those incredible actions. It's incredible to see what we can do when we come together.
If work is going to be done, that work needs to be done by you. And not necessarily in every case, but if there's good I want to see put out into the world, why not put it out myself?
Can I tell a story, briefly?
Sure.
So in Hinduism, there's this story about the churning of the Milky Ocean to get the nectar of immortality from it. The gods aren't immortal at this point, and they can't churn this vast ocean alone, and so they have to enlist the demons to help them. And so both of them are churning this ocean together, and they get the nectar of immortality from it, and then there's a fight over who's going to be immortal, the gods or the demons, because there isn't enough to go round, and obviously both of them want it. And so Lord Vishnu sees this and decides that he's going to transform. And he becomes Mohini, who is the most beautiful woman that this world has ever seen. This gorgeous image of divine trans femininity. She comes down to earth and she picks up this nectar of immortality, and she tells the gods and the demons to form two lines. The gods are here and the demons are like side by side. She feeds one spoon to the gods, and she pretends to feed one spoon to the demons, and they're just so entranced by her that they don't even realize that the spoon is coming to their mouth, but they're not being fed. And in this way, the gods reach immortality and the demons don't. Knowing that story, reading that story for the first time, was something that really just changed something inside of me. Just this concept of, yes, trans is divine. Transness has existed before any kind of concept of governments and parties and politicians and healthcare secretaries. And it will outlive it because it has existed for so long and it hasn't changed. And if it's something that the gods can be, then so can we. If it can be seen as the most beautiful thing to ever grace this earth, then that's what we are.
We've made our intentions very clear here, in the sense that while the film is being released to a wider audience, it's only really intended for one person in particular, and that's Labour MP Wes Streeting. Dear Wes, as the architect of the UK government's ban on puberty blockers, our intention here was to appeal to your humanity. We wanted you to listen to the transgender youth this ruling throws under the bus, the parents who are struggling for support, and the healthcare professionals who are fighting for their cause. Whether you did or didn't listen is something that I can't control, but I do have one last card up my sleeve. While we've done our absolute best to ensure that we presented a well-informed argument, with the same empathy and love we always do, the finished film is missing one key element, and that's you. The plan is as follows. You pick a time, you pick a date, and myself and a small crew will meet you at a neutral location for an interview that will go live onto our YouTube channel. I'll be firm, but fair with my questioning, giving you the chance to explain your motivations and concerns when it comes to transgender youth. Being live, you can rest assured that the content of the interview will be in no way manipulated. It also gives you the opportunity to answer questions not just from me, but directly from the community itself. Our only stipulation is that this happens sooner rather than later, so we're giving you 60 days to make this happen. That's more than enough time to fit us into your schedule. Despite appearances, we're surprisingly amenable, but we won't accept any cries if I didn't get the memo. Because if I know the transgender community, and at this point I do, they are not going to let that happen. We're laying down the gauntlet in as respectful a manner we could muster. There are no ultimatums here. I'm not the Joker, a role that belongs exclusively to Vera Drew for the record. You need to see this for what it really is, an opportunity to better explain yourself to a community that feels like you've failed them. So, that's it. That's the end of the film. What happens next? I leave that entirely in your hands. Mr. Streeting, I believe it's your move.